Hey guys, this is Obsidian Chill. Got another video for you today, and this is coming from the test server, or part of episode 46, Justice League Dark Cursed. This is the new 8-player elite raid, Cursed Themyscira. So to address the kind of recurring questions each video, there is no set release date yet for the episode as of the recording. It more than likely is going to be early October. Also in terms of like the artifacts, allies, OP items, max CR, all those types of questions will be answered if you follow this channel, because I will have separate uploads on each of those, addressing each one. So first of all, the elite raid, kind of to get the first impressions out of the way, is that there is a lot of promise. As we kind of progress through the commentary, there's going to be points where there's certainly things they need to address. And the goal is not to make Elite overly difficult, because we know Elite Plus is going to be coming. They've already announced that, and it's not going to be with release. It's going to be the same thing. It's going to be a delayed release for Elite Plus. But we know that it's coming. So there's no point of kind of throwing everything in the kitchen sink into Elite, because all it is going to alienate the player base, because already they think of my attempts or the attempts of the community to increase the difficulty elite as gatekeeping per se. But there's certainly no reason why you can't have a mechanically engaging elite raid. It doesn't no one, even the endgame community, doesn't want like just high health pools and one shots. That's not how you have elite difficulty. It's just walking around trying to survive. It's that you have mechanics that are engaging and difficult, so that you have to overcome them. And that's where there's certainly room for that. I mean, like, if we kind of compare like Terrarium Elite, there wasn't really much mechanics per se. I mean, you separate the bosses, which you were going to do anyway because they buff each other. So I mean, that's not really a mechanic that you worry about, because you were going to separate them anyway. And then other than that, you've got that shielding mechanic which works out. But I mean, all it is that's just running to a dome basically. The orb mechanic was great. There's other aspects of it, but other than that, it was a really straightforward fight. Where this raid is similar as well, but there's room for improvement. And that's what I really hope that we can get some feedback for. So kind of to address the fight here, it's going to be, you're going to see elements of recycled Gates of Tartarus. But the nice thing about that is that the majority of the player base doesn't really know Gates of Tartarus raid as well as some like super old veterans will, because Gates of Tartarus is run so much during DLC 3. And now, so think of that. Gates of Tartarus came out in DLC 3. Now we're on DLC 46. So there's plenty of a gap between that. So players won't feel like they've been running the same instance over and over again. There's different barriers. So technically, this room right here is a part of Gates of Tartarus, but you're going to see as we kind of progress backwards through the raid. So it doesn't really feel like that at all. In terms of this fight, we are facing Cursed Cersei and Cursed Wonder Woman. So really, this is where the kind of the improvement aspect comes from. So you got a Beastie Morph that spawns. See that giant red circle on the ground? You're going to have some kind of spike damage and pushback when the Beastie Morph spawns. I believe it's on like a 45-second timer or so, but there is a point where they stop spawning towards the end. But the main mechanic has to deal with Cursed Wonder Woman. She's going to teleport to the center. You're going to see that kind of purple pulsed on the floor. And really that just does like a massive damage hit. I think it's like maybe 400k in reg and like 600 or 700k in elite. So it's not a one shot, but it's close to it. But really, obviously just jump over it. So I mean, it's an interesting mechanic from that point where you just kind of jump over. It's similar to like the lockdown raid, if you remember that, where you had to kind of jump over like the spinning fire blade, stuff like that, and those mechanics. So certainly, I believe it should kind of be expanded upon, where it actually debuffs you as well if you get hit, instead of just damage hit, where you can easily recover from like a Page to Destiny proc. But other than that, you've got Cursed Wonder Woman. She also does her shield. The odd thing about the shield is that it's not always a one-shot. I mean, it kind of one-shots the tank consistently, so that's why you see me being hesitant around it, or kind of separating and walking away from Cersei. But as a DPS, I've hit the shield and not died, so I think it's just a little inconsistent from that nature. The Beastie Morphs, you don't have to kill whatsoever. They're not tied to anything like that. They're just going to keep spawning. They're just kind of there just to kind of overwhelm. But they kind of die from splash damage anyway. In terms of the boss fights themselves, in terms of how they kind of their counter mechanics are, Cursed Cersei's a bit weird. All she does is basically do her leap attack or fist slam with hand blasters. So really, you just kind of keep tap blocking that. Cersei's or Wonder Woman's the same kind of concept with her shield. It wasn't as known from that clip, but you do have to kill them together. You do have a pretty good grace period. I think it's probably like 60 seconds or so. Don't quote me on that because I pay attention. But other times where we didn't kill them at the same time, it seemed like quite some time before Cersei got back up, and they get back up at like 35% health. So this is the kind of part where Gates, you may recall, we're going backwards, so that was the second boss fight in Gates, and then we're going back up the hallway backwards, and then we go back into the original room for Gates. In terms of the ads here, I mean, they're easily tanked, but there are some harpies in there, and harpies have some melee explosions, so you don't really want to get in that dog pile as a DPS. I've learned that as well. Because you can't really do anything with the harpy explosions. You can keep things juggled, but you could probably have it better. I mean, I could have taken like a flashpoint as well, just to keep the perma juggle, but I'm not sure what the troll was doing if he was CCing ads either. But other than that, it's a really straightforward first boss fight, but there's so much more that can be expanded upon. Cursed Cersei has this kind of chain lightning attack that it says it's like a skull attack. It says block chain Cersei's chain lightning. It only happens once towards the end of the fight, but other than that, it really has no impact, barely noticeable. So really, Cursed Wonder Woman has some mechanics associated with the first boss fight. Cursed Cersei doesn't really. She's just kind of there. She does do her well, you'll see their kind of shield animation. It's her kind of Legends PV shield. But I've hit it and not taken really any damage as a tank and a DPS, so I'm not sure if it's actually being effective or not. But that's what I mean. So kind of my philosophy, or the philosophy that I believe that developers should take when going for elite content, is that instead of working out a base, so basically, okay, here's the raid, now we're going to build up the elite mechanics, we're going to do regular, then build up and add some mechanics for elite, and then add mechanics for elite plus. That's backwards thinking in my mind. I think you should make the raid as hard as humanly possible to start with, and then you strip away those mechanics. So it's okay, here's elite or elite plus, whatever you want to start with. We're gonna make this the hardest possible way that we can think of, and then okay, this is too much for elite, we'll take this, so we'll save this elite plus. This is gonna be too much for elite, and then we'll take it away, and this will be reg, and then this will be event. It's so much easier to scale a raid properly when you work backwards like that, rather than okay, what am I gonna add? So that's what happens with like Trurium Elite Plus. Is like, okay, how do I make Elite Plus harder? Okay, we're gonna add the same mechanic from like Source Wall Elite Plus and do some other ones. So it's basically thinking after the fact, or they may have ideas as they're developing the raid, but most of it is just kind of okay, how can I make this harder? And then we'll just increase their health or difficulty and everything like that. So that's the wrong approach that I feel. To kind of interrupt here, so you may have heard the live stream they said about a new map on the raid. That's what this is here, the kind of the floating island aspect. It's a really beautiful map. I mean, yeah, it's kind of ghosty water, but I'm not sure how this kind of ties into Hectate's, if it's kind of like comic related, where if this is her world or something like that. But this is definitely the most interesting fight at the moment. So how it entails. Ethereal Hectate, you can't counter her, so you're going to see some fates and counters, but you can't actually knock her down. I'm not sure if that's intended or not, I've asked, but you can't counter this boss. The red circles that you see underneath players are water spouts. They're going to come up, kind of juggle you, and basically just roll out of the way. You're going to see a larger kind of purplish blue pool that she's going to spawn all the way around her. If you're a melee range to her, you don't take this right here. So if you're melee range, you don't take damage, but if you're in the actual waves, you do. So either you get out of range, or you just lunge her and then you roll back because she's going to do red circle on herself. So the same thing, that's why you see kind of the players lunge in. I mean, that's an interesting mechanic. In terms of, it's not going to be a one-shot, it's probably going to be a one-shot in Elite Plus, but an Elite is like maybe, I think, 400k. The water spouts are definitely annoying. It's got a quick cooldown. You're going to see how that impacts a little bit later. Now, the only thing that's not completely understood about the fight is how these thoughts interact. So you're going to see these two doors. There's two types of thoughts. There's passive thoughts and angry thoughts. They both have a separate buff, apparently, on the boss. The other weird aspect right now is that you'll see that DPS died. When the thoughts come out, there's a detaunt on the boss, and she drops aggro a bunch of times. It's weird. So as you can see here, she's out lunging players, but I'm obviously applying a debuff on her. Or not debuff, but obviously applying a taunt. So basically, I'm just trying to range, gather up the ads, because the closer they get to the boss, they'll kind of absorb. So they just continually keep walking towards the boss. There's nothing you can do about that. So ideally, you're not forced to have a second tank mechanic. I mean, obviously, if they increase the buff, that it might be a situation where you have to have a second tank. But really, you just kind of survive and pull what you can. But eventually, they're going to make it there anyway. So I'm not sure if the passive or angry thoughts have a tie to a detaunt or a de-aggro. That would make any sense if it was, but that's all it is. So that's the one other phase. The other phase is going to be coming up here. We're going to see speed zones. It's not, the mechanics, as far as I can tell, are not health based. They're timing based. So you can see here, so absorbs unconscious energy, but I'm not entirely sure what energy the effect those have, because the only thing I can see changing is the de-aggro, but nothing else changes. I mean, the boss, there's a few times where she hits a little bit harder, but nothing, that isn't unreasonable. It doesn't need to be impacting the group, because I've DPS this as well and tanked it. And from a DPS perspective, other than her like lunging you, there's really no change. You'll see a bunch of whirlpools spawn too. This is the one thing you might have to have your graphics kind of up, is to see some of the whirlpools. This will be the second phase here. So you got these speed zones. You get transformed into a mental ghost, and then basically you have to avoid these bubbles. These bubbles are pretty much a near one shot. They're 500k, so if you get by 2, you're dead. And they kind of spread out in this pattern. So I mean, obviously you can walk around the edge, but then you end up dying because you run out of space, or you getting close and kind of just follow the pattern around. And that's why you see these zones are back to back. It seems, since they're not health based, so it seems to be timer based, or maybe it's health based once she hits 35%, something like that. This is another weird thing. Obviously I transformed, then I got stuck and slowed, and it wouldn't go fast, and then I got killed by the bubbles. So it's not exactly a fine-tuned mechanic yet. The other frustrating thing is that when the ghost phase ends, obviously it's been long enough, you can't taunt her because she's untargetable within her shield. So as soon as that phase drops, she lunges out at an ally where you don't have time to pick up aggro. This was also super annoying too. So what you saw there, so I had a whirlpool spawn under me. The whirlpool, if you go back, the whirlpool completely always juggles you. So even if you break out, you don't get immunity from the juggle. So you keep on, you break out, get juggled, break out, get juggled, and you have to try to roll. But then I've got all the ads around me, and you also saw a water spout spawn underneath me. So it's basically, I was completely trapped and like nothing I can do. So I had to eat that death. So that was kind of frustrating. But as you can see here, towards the end, it just kind of gets like back-to-back phases of this bubble, which I mean is understandable. I mean, that's not a bad thing once they kind of fine-tune it. As you can see here, as soon as she dropped, I taunted her. She lunged it out at the troll regardless. So it seems like right after that phase, she completely ignores aggro, because it should go back to me, especially if she's blocking and then not prepared to lunge the other player. So, and I taunted her before that, so she should have switched back onto me. So that's kind of frustrating. But sorry, here's kind of the third phase. You're going to have these kind of water golems come out. These balls are about 300k each. You can kind of keep them juggled, but they do break out and start spinning. So it's really, I don't think they can be perma-juggled. I might have to focus more on like a juggling rotation, but they break out pretty quickly and then they start spinning, and that's where the balls come. So really, you may think of this as kind of repetitive mechanics back and forth, but they're new. I mean, certainly we have never had a fight like this before on a new map like this, kind of fighting in water. So it's this where that's where I kind of said at the beginning where this raid has a lot of promise. So right now it's really straightforward. I wouldn't necessarily say it's super easy. It's probably on par with like see, you didn't have to instantly get juggled by those bubbles or the whirlpools. But yes, there's certainly a little bit of fine tuning, a little bit of mechanics added. This fight can be really engaging. First boss can be really engaging. So that's why I say there's certainly promise, and especially in Elite Plus. I mean, with all the damage aspects from like the water pools, the water spouts, the bubbles, especially if the bubbles go faster, more phases and like that. I mean, Elite Plus, that's definitely going to kill you in a one shot. And then it's really hard to get a revive too, because if you've got a water spout or a water pool, whirlpool under you, then the damage is constant. So you can't get that res, because if you go towards there, you're going to get hit and kind of juggled as well. So getting a revive is not the simplest project. The other thing too, I kind of hope is that because you're teleporting out to that second map, is that I really hope that players don't get DC'd like Phoenix Cannon. But we'll have to see how that plays out. Okay, so for the last boss, familiar with Gates of Hardest Raid, this will be the first room. This is where we fight Hecate and her aspect. Now, this encounter is pretty much entirely mechanic driven. Right now, like I said before, it's got promise, but you'll see here. So our healer, Mystic Test, was going to warp out and I guess reset or something with her armories or something like that, or his armories. But the problem is he didn't leave and we started the fight. So this entire boss fight, we don't have any healer for Elite. So that's a little bit concerning. I mean, you should. I mean, there's obviously Elite counters where you don't need a healer per se, but I mean, really, if it's a brand new raid, on everyone's kind of lower CR. There's obviously tons of ads and bosses, everything like that. So there's bombs that are there, toxic gas fields. You would think that you would need a healer. So I mean, obviously as a fire tank, I've got self heals, but I mean the group doesn't. They're just relying on supply drops. So that's a one concerning aspect where it's a little bit too easy if you're down the healer the entire fight. But what it is here, at the start of each phase, you're gonna have Hecate's aspect is gonna be shielded, and then you have to go to Circe, who transforms you into a beastie morph, and then you go into the 5 kind of like clouds in the 4 corners. They basically, you turn the cog, and then essentially what's gonna happen is a little orb is gonna spawn. You take the orb, run it to Aspect Hecate, and it's going to slowly drop her shield. You need all 4 to drop the shield. Then you can attack her, or attack the boss, and then basically restart the phase. And that's what it is. So there's bombs ready to turn the cogs, or they explode. Wonder Woman's kind of fighting Hecate, but you can't target Hecate. Wonder Woman's slowly going to die, and you have to revive her. Not entirely sure how that plays out in terms of if you don't revive Wonder Woman. I think Hecate just kind of either targets a player or targets the tank for damage, but obviously you can't target Hecate, so it's just more of just kind of like extra damage or an annoyance. You're also going to have these kind of purple orbitals spawn. They don't do a lot of damage. I think maybe it's like 40, 60k or something or like ticks over time, but they slow you, so I guess that's more just to kind of play into the fact where the mechanics. The orbs you can pick up and throw, and they don't despawn after you throw them. And that's essentially the fight. You just do the same thing. I think it's 4 times you have to do it. So that's why it's compared to first boss and second boss in this raid, third boss definitely is a letdown. But like I said, there's certainly things they could do here to make it more challenging. In terms of like having, say, right now any player can get transformed to a beastie morph. You don't even lose your power, so there's no downside of being transformed into a beastie morph. That's the thing where in Pugs, certainly you're going to have DPS just kind of just killing ads because they will technically respawn endlessly. But obviously you can't destroy Hecate, so there's no point of really DPSing until those orbs are in. But I mean, of course in Pugs you're just going to kind of damage farm. But since when you're transformed into a beastie morph, you don't lose your abilities. So really there's no downside to it. So that's where something obviously that could change as well. You'll see this kind of purple kind of rings around me at the bottom, or kind of purple whatever effects. That's actually kind of interesting. It's a knockdown. So if you're standing by a player near that, you're constantly going to get knocked down. So obviously the DPS is super frustrating if someone's standing beside you with that, because you're just going to get knocked out of your channels each time. But I didn't pick up on that until I was actually DPSing, and I was wondering why I kept getting knocked down. I thought it was just like a boss effect. But yeah, I was saying in terms of like making it, here's me sitting in a toxic gas pool as a fire tank, wondering why my health is going down. But yeah, one of the things where they can certainly make it harder is that right now any player can, even multiple players can go back transform. You can have one player do this. But what you can change it to, yeah, here's me getting back my last proc heal without a healer. But yeah, sorry, I've kind of been sidetracked twice now. Feel like Robin Williams in the commentary. So if you had set each role, so like only DPS could pick up this one, only healer, only tank, like each role could pick those up. A nice little bug at the end where it says you completed Legion of Doom, and then you get omnibus loot as well. But we're kind of getting to the end of the commentary. But like I said, the overall takeaways is that the first impressions, it's a good elite raid. Is it challenging right now? No. Is there room to make it challenging? Yes. Is there room to make it a good Elite Plus raid? Yes. So that's the hope. Right now, it's going to be reliant on our feedback as players and the feedback the developers take away, and that's what we'll have to see how this raid turns into. So, take care, guys. We'll see you in the next video.